I mean, the risk of there being a major outbreak, obviously, is which everybody thinks about. But what will happen is that those individuals that were infected will have contact tracing. And that's the public health weapon, if you want to call it that, we have. Namely, to get those people isolated and to do the contact tracing. We don't have enough information now because this is the first that I've actually heard about it also with a busy day. So as soon as we get further information, we'll be happy to share that with you.
Vice President, the President just a short while ago said that anybody that needs a test can have a test, they're all set. Can we drill down on that? When exactly will a person who feels like they may have coronavirus, can they go into their doctor's office and get a test? In addition to that, Mr. Vice President, just a short while ago, the President described Governor Inslee of Washington State, who you just met with yesterday, as a snake. He also described the coronavirus test, compared it to the phone call that he had with the leader of Ukraine. Is the President addressing the situation with the seriousness it requires?
Well, I promise you, President Trump has no higher priority than the health and safety of the American people. And he's assembled an extraordinary group of Americans and agencies. I'm a little more than a week into leading the White House coronavirus effort, and I couldn't be more proud and more impressed with the team that the President assembled. But I think your first question is a very important one, Jim, and I appreciate it. The President's exactly right that for the state laboratories, for the communities that have been impacted, that have concerns about the coronavirus, we have been able to respond to requests for tests. And literally, you can hear that the test that's been made available since the first of this month is literally mounts in the hundreds of thousands of millions of tests. But for the American public to have access to the coronavirus test, it's the reason why President Trump brought in this week all of the CEOs of the top commercial laboratories in the country. They're the ones that we believed could spin up a new test very rapidly. They have enormous logistics and manufacturing capabilities. And we said to them, we want you to work together because whilst all state labs can now conduct their own tests, and while we've, as I described, and as Dr. Hahn described, we've distributed hundreds of thousands. In fact, over 1 million tests around the country to get it all across the American people, to your local doctor, to your pharmacy, to what when my kids were little we used to call the med check. It's going to require these commercial labs. And the good news is it didn't get too widely reported, but both LabCorp and Quest, two of the largest commercial labs in the country, just announced that by Monday they will have tests available for distribution and sale across the country.
If I could just follow up, Mr. Vice President, if somebody is feeling ill this weekend and they go to the doctor on Monday, can the doctor request a coronavirus test? Any American in the country, or are we not at that point? I just want to make sure that it's crystal clear in terms of what the expectations are.
Well, I think for any American that is symptomatic, speaking to your doctor, if you have reason to believe that you have been exposed to the coronavirus, I have every confidence that your physician would contact state health officials and have access to the state lab. We've made those tests available to the state labs. I've spoke to Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina today. I spoke to Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia last night. And we've been working hard to make sure that where we have suspected cases, that we've been making tests available. But you make a very fair point about the wider availability to doctors and physicians and clinics will happen, we believe, because of the collaboration that President Trump forged with our commercial labs. And the great news is, as they announced yesterday, by Monday, the two of the largest commercial labs in America announced they will have tests and begin to take them to market.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Two questions, if I could, one on workers and one on families. First one on workers. There are a lot of Americans who are worried about losing wages if they're forced to stay home because they're not on a regular salary. Is the White House preparing any sort of economic mitigation effort for workers who suffer wage losses here? And the second one is on families, which is you're telling people to stay home if they feel sick. What's your advice to parents of children who might have a lot of vulnerable people in their households? Should they be quarantining themselves with their children in the house, or do they need to be quarantining themselves somewhere else away from their own families and children?
Well, with regard to your first question, I will tell you that I've been very inspired at the response of businesses around this country and their sensitivity and decision-making about Americans who
I said a bunch of damn crazies act like morons in this state because
but I will tell
single
you,
case hits the state, everybody's panicking like crazy.
Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate, we talked about should this become much more widespread in the country. There were recommendations from Congress, which I know we would carefully consider. But your second question, I think, might be the most important one asked, and that is for families, what are the best practices at home? And I'd like to ask Dr. Birx to address that.
That's an excellent question. I come from a multi-generational household. I have 9-month-old, 2-year-old grandchildren. My parents live in the same household. They're 91 and 96. And my daughter and husband are there. And I think this is a very critical question. And it's why over the last week we've really been focused on who is the most vulnerable, who needs to be protected, and ensuring that every family understands that. And I think your question is critical because it comes back to what Dr. Fauci said. If they follow good hand-washing techniques, if they ensure that everything is washed, that is used with the grandparents, if they ensure that the children, if ill, are kept away from the grandparents and somewhat separated in the household with strong cleaning and other hand washing and hand touching pieces. This is what social distancing can occur in the household. And that's really the focus that we have, that every household has the capacity in order to ensure this health and welfare of their elderly and others with medical conditions. And I want to make sure we've also emphasized that, because anyone that has an immunodeficiency independent of age is someone else that we have to be very careful with and ensuring that we're protecting them.
Should they be sending those family members who are not infected to stay somewhere else? So if you've got a couple of kids, one who's infected and the other ones are not, should you send the ones who are still healthy somewhere else, or do you need to quarantine everybody in the family in the same house at the same time? Because that sounds a little scary.
I'm looking at Dr. Fauci, and I think that's a great question, and we're gonna talk about that. And I don't want to give.
I don't think there really is a decisive answer about that. It depends upon the feasibility of, do you have some place to put the child? I think that if you're in a situation where you really cannot do it, then you just sort of say, well, I'm going to keep them both together, realizing that with children, and this gets back to what I just said a little while ago, the risk of there being a problem of infection with the children is really very low. If you look at all of the reports from every place, from China, from Italy, from Korea, it's the same.
Just you guys have it. Follow up an earlier question. If today any American who wants a test cannot currently get a test, when is that target date? When do we expect any American who wants a test to same day be able to get it?
Let me ask Dr. Hahn to respond to that. But when we met with the major commercial labs, in addition to, I want to emphasize that again, because of the changes that the FDA made, now all state labs can perform a coronavirus test. And I spoke to one governor about that today, and we clarified that with them. We've distributed these kits, hundreds of thousands, over 1 million tests, more to come. But to get the test widely distributed across the country, I couldn't be more grateful that our commercial labs have already announced, 2 of the leading commercial labs in America, that they'll create a product. But let me talk to let me let you talk to Dr. Hahn, because the FDA is in the process of working with those companies and see if Dr. Hahn has a sense. But I remember that they told us, given their enormous production capability, that in a matter of weeks, not months, that we could be seeing a coronavirus broadly distributed around the country and then growing literally by the day. Dr. Hahn, is that about right?
That's correct. Thank you, Mr. Vice
And
President.
also, if I might add to that, do you have some idea of how many test kits we are going to need total?
So I'm going to use the term tests, not kits, so that we can be clear about, sort of the lexicon that we're using. So as I mentioned, as of tomorrow, we expect 1.1 million tests to have been shipped to laboratories, and those would have gone to mostly non-public health laboratories. In answer to your question, because I'm thinking like a doctor here, if I were with a patient who came in, I wanted a test. What I would recommend to that provider is to contact, as the Vice President said, their local public health group, because they're going to be able to know about availability in that state. But as the Vice President says, with these large commercial labs having the ability to now scale up those tests, and this is a critical part of this, in addition to the millions of tests that we'll be sending out this upcoming week, as well as what we've already done, we expect that to surge substantially.
And how many days are we talking? We need a test available potentially for every American. What is our target?